Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And it's now my turn to sing for my supper, as they say in English. I want to thank especially Marek, Tom, and Tuli Piesalu. I find the name difficult, but the person is an angel. Every time I have a little or a tiny problem or crisis, there she is, like an angel, I swear. I find it very difficult to give this lecture with the brilliant predecessors I've had so far. I wish I could do what Sigmund and Michael did, which is to speak like that, because I like dialogue and I hate the necessity to read, but I'm speaking in a foreign language. As an example of everything we've been discussing so far, I do what I like to do in general, that is to present a case. And the case cannot be anything else than the film I'm presenting tonight. I begin with a reflection by American scholar Susan Rubin Suleiman concerning the contemporary. And this is from a rather old book from 1990. How does one create a future that will acknowledge the past without repeating it? Her instance is the Holocaust, but I think that can be generalized. How does one look at the past with understanding, yet critically? In the etymological sense of critical, from the Greek krinein, to separate, to choose, which has to do with discrimination and choice in the present. And I think that Zygmunt Bauman's lecture yesterday was the most brilliant example of that. Looking at the past critically, with understanding, in order to come up with a possibility of a future. The contemporary is, as Suleiman wrote, what concerns us. Very simple interpretation. And that entails, to cite the title of the book that she wrote after that, risking who one is. If it concerns us, you risk who you are by engaging it, by discriminating and choosing in the present. These statements are programmatic for what I have been up to over 10 years now. After having been accused of anachronistic readings of old master paintings, and accused violently, I have thought through what that means, because I love to be criticized, because it makes me think. What does it mean? And I concluded that anachronism is indispensable if we are to make cultural utterances of whatever past era matter to us. Although I've worked on cultural material produced over 2,000 years ago, as our chair has just explained, on art from the Baroque period, and on 19th century fiction, and 20th century, early 20th century modernism, my passionately pursued goal has always been to understand the present. It was always on behalf of the present that I was curious to understand the artifacts from the past. So the topic of this meeting, absence, presence, distance, ways of seeing the past, is very dear to me, very close to my heart. The project I present here combines, integrates academic reflection on our relationship with art from the past, pertaining to its own contemporary society, with a collaborative, experimental series of video works, out of which we, and now I'm speaking for Michelle and me, make several different immersive exhibitions and a feature film that you will see tonight. A project, in short, of bringing the contemporaneity of a past artwork into the present. Just a little background. 10 years ago, we met British artist Michelle Williams-Gamaker and I, and we began to use the medium of film together in the collaboration initially of scholar and artist, two specialties that crossed over. So now we are both. I have become an artist, Michelle has become a scholar. When working together, we work in complete integration of our talents and skills and have no division of tasks among the many that video making entails, from concept to script, pre-production, filming, costume design, editing, post-production. We do it all, and we do it all together. We work in extremely low budget circumstances, which entails limitations, severe limitations, but also a great deal of artistic freedom, including the freedom to integrate artistic and academic ideas. And we are fortunate to find a great number of volunteers, as you have for this winter school. Volunteers are the flesh of the social, of the social possibility to do things. A great number of volunteers of brilliant talent to help organize film shoots, find and secure sites, and of course to act. All are motivated by their belief in the social, cultural, and artistic relevance of the project, and I really wish to honor them here because they are indispensable. Filmmaking is collective and dialogic, a form of cultural analysis that cannot be done by other means because of this collective and dialogic character. We make videos to get a grip on contemporary culture in becoming, hence not yet adequately documented. The first result was a range of experimental documentaries on questions of migration, which was a very important and is a very important issue in the society today, made with a philosophy of documentary filmmaking that includes modesty, intimacy, and respect for silences. Stylistically, as a result, they are characterized by the following features. Self-narration of the participants, usually called subjects, but I find that a demeaning term. Collective editing by the makers and the participants who get to see and comment on drafts. It's about them, so to speak. It stages them so they have to have a say in how it gets to be seen. There is no voiceover. Only what people themselves wish to disclose is spoken in the films. And sometimes that means that certain things cannot be spoken. And then there is only set sound, no added music, which we consider easily manipulative and thus goes against the grain of our principles. And then finally, there's no chronology, but associative connections. It's more like memory than like history. From there, we began to work on the question of mental illness, popularly called madness, in the social domain, which has yielded a feature film called A Long History of Madness, and video installation pieces exhibited 9 times in the first year. Although this work comprises documentary elements, such as the session notes of the psychoanalyst treating people, it was fundamentally made as a fiction, and we call it a theoretical fiction. And here I just show you quickly the 3 series of exhibitions that I've been involved in proposing and offering. The first on the bottom the first 3 are on the migration issues. Then there's a whole range on the madness, from the landscapes of madness to saying it in the Freud Museum. And then we are now just starting with Madame B, and you see your precious Waal gallery on the top line. Then we felt compelled to undertake an examination of the literary, philosophical, and cultural actuality of Gustave Flaubert's 1856 prophetic masterpiece, Madame Bovary. Its relevance for today's global economy in crisis, as this tagline here suggests. In this presentation, I address this project to present the theoretical, aesthetic, and social issues that pertain to the transformations of literary and audiovisual media as a transformation of past into present, and the possibilities to avoid the distancing and absenting effects of traditional historical writing and imaging. Images are generated not directly by stories, so this whole idea of telling the story in another means is false, but by reflections inherent in the stories we have and the modes of storytelling. That's where you start. And these include considerations of the contemporaneity of the image. The image exists, functions, and affects us in the present. This is the bottom line principle of the work. Do we have a next slide? Yeah. Our work is based on anachronism, endorsed wholeheartedly as a way of thinking. and on quotation as a way of turning that into imaging. I will talk a bit more of the way images are generated and what kind of quotation this entails. This includes reflection on how other existing visual sources create retrospective affiliations that can be seen as reversed quotations. Performance itself, for example, can be quoted. Quotation is not always about words. So I want to show different forms of quotation. And the first here is very simple: costume. We started from the premise that anachronism is indispensable because the image, remade every time someone sees it, is in constant transformation. And at the same time, it stands outside of standard time. So it has this sort of transhistorical existence, but it is constantly transformed. It unfolds in the tempo and in the mode of those who see it. When we reread Flaubert's novel for the purpose of this project, we realized that the novel is more than proto-feminist, prophetic, radical, of a progressive vision, even today, hard to understand, and exuberantly audiovisual, even cinematic. The man was not yet 30 years old when he started this project, just to encourage you to think of your next project. Among the many visual aspects, this translated into choice of costume, with exuberantly modern design, to be close to the contemporaneity, and sometimes a little vintage, old-fashioned, but never period dress, never to the 1850s. Here you see Emma, including in one image, the last one, in a kind of flashback where she wears 1950s chic. The other costumes are all contemporary, high design for extravagant outings, and ordinary, nice for the everyday. Here is the character of Rodolphe, the seducer Rodolphe, very cynical man, whose costumes waver between strictly contemporary and vaguely old-fashioned. That vague old-fashionedness means that we do not wish to make every single image rigorously contemporary only at the cost of keeping in touch with the past. And that's a very subtle balance that we were pursuing. The films, the interaction with the public the interaction with the public happens in the present, as Flaubert's harsh commentary on the morals of his time addressed his contemporaries. And that is the fundamental property of that novel, and that is what we need to somehow work into the present. Now, casting the novel in the past, as most films, historical costume dramas do, goes against the most characteristic feature, which is the rigorous contemporaneity of the novel. For it puts the story, the images, the characters at a distance, bringing them far away, pushing them away in history, so that we can have compassion and shed hot tears, but secretly be happy that we are not Emma. Our hypothesis reverses this. Emma is us, is like us, we are like her, or could be like her. Be warned, because it's a pretty heavy story. How do we visualize that potential likeness? Visual quotation from other sources is closer to the novel than historicizing it. Even someone really brilliant like Claude Chabrol was too enamored of Flaubert's novel to be able to bring it into the contemporary. And so he did a beautiful job making it distant and absent. Instead, we hint at history through some costumes and some sentences, but without recreating the past. We also quoted different artists, post-Flaubert artists. And this too is a form of loyalty to Flaubert's novel. For example, Maya Deren's experimental avant-garde film Atlantis from 1944 may seem out of touch with Flaubert's novel if you take chronology literally. However, what we quote here is not a specific source or precedent, but the fact that the novel is replete with quotations from earlier discourses and from contemporary discourses, in this case, 19th century Romanticism, which clash with and inflect the contemporary derivative motifs and discourses of the characters. Similarly, in At Land, Diren, this is Diren herself, staging herself, acts as an instigator whose presence in various landscapes causes one to question who is actually responding to whom, the land, the landscape, or her presence in it. Here you see an example, like in these images from Diren's film, and below you see how our Emma crawls through the foliage in the way that Diren does in her film. In both cases, figure and landscape become ambivalently separated. They become sort of merged. And this is the quotation from Flaubert. Flaubert's critique of romanticism, there is a contemporary derivative avant-gardism in contemporary cinema. Quoting this other artist is in tune with Flaubert's citational writing. What we actually quote is the enigmatic performance of the relationship between the landscape and the figure, a literal case of figure and ground confusion, and that is in Flaubert. This has also a strictly literary form. It's an instance of what in another aspect of the novel concerns its visuality, noticeable in the predominance of description and its narratively arbitrary appearances. Suddenly you have a description and you don't know why. The sparing use of dialogue and the replacement of dialogue with not only by narration but also that ambiguous mode, free indirect discourse. Is that clear to everyone what that is? Yes. Yeah, okay. And it's structuring, well, if you're not from literature, you may not know this. It's structuring through montage. Now, free and direct discourse willfully confuses the categories of who speaks and who sees, who perceives. In other words, it confuses narration, voice, with vocalization. Vocalization includes not only seeing, but also, in an important way, hearing. FID, free and direct discourse, also facilitates a multiplication of subjectivities. These properties make the novel itself immersive. Hence, an immersive exhibition is an appropriate form. These modes, especially through such unmotivated shifts, share a tendency to tell through images, allowing a dynamic between the proclaimed objectivity of realism and the fundamental subjectivity or solidarity with the latter by means of the former. And this is the revolution of Flaubert's writing. This subjectivity is where character and reader-viewer meet. And this has far-reaching consequences that for us pertain to the political as the site where past meets present, on its, the present's, terms. An example is our incorporation of William Kentridge's opera Refuse the Hour from 2012. This opera ridicules political issues, most powerfully colonialism, through the motif of the clock. And you will hear tonight that the clock is a relentless element in Emma's boredom. Now, we espoused Flaubert's interest in misunderstanding while using an opera that was vastly different from the one that he uses. We wanted an artwork that, by sheer brilliance, would be, we hope, soliciting from the public an endorsement, as well as grasp the depth of Emma's incapacity to think socially, beyond the mirror, so to speak. Moreover, like Donizetti's opera Lucia di Lammermoor, that Flaubert quotes, we selected fragments that broach subject close to hope for Emma, and I already mentioned the clock. These choices are both affiliations with Flaubert and discussions with his work. It's a kind of anachronism that is a form of historical thinking rather than the kind of unreflected projection to which historians are rightly allergic. And Michael mentioned that yesterday, that there is good reason to stay away from anachronism if it is an unreflected projection. I said earlier that the exhibitions are immersive. With this term, immersive exhibition, we refer to an artistic form wherein form and meaning, technique and ambiance collaborate to solicit the participatory presence of the spectator, more or less in the sense of identification in literature or cinema, but without the sentimentalist and manipulative lures that so often come with it. Dominique Lacapra, the American historian, calls it empathic unsettlement. And that's a beautiful term for a sort of critical empathy. Examples are plenty of the misuse of immersion to encourage sentimental, passive, and even terribly manipulative forms of identification. For example, there was a British experiment making Madame Bovary the subject of an interactive project where the viewer had the choice to enact Rodolphe. That was the only choice. You could be Rodolphe, the cynical lover, and use Emma any way you wanted. Brilliant. So we don't mean interactive in that technical sense. Now, the immersive exhibition also makes an analogy to literature's serialization of narrative fiction, presenting contiguous, typically chronological, installments. In 1856, Flaubert serialized Madame Bovary in the Revue de Paris, of which you see here a copy. Wandering through the museum, the viewer comes across installments of Emma's life, and to that extent we quote the serialization of his publication. While not following the content of a chapter, the scenes impart updates as you travel through the space. Unlike the serialized novel, our immersive exhibition does not prescribe an order, offering anti-chronological alternatives through the space, because exhibition is a spatial. And I'm beginning to feel that I need some water. Maybe one of those wonderful angels can go and get some. I'm sorry, but... oh, there is. Okay, great. So now I want to talk a little bit about something that Lev Manowitz has called, thank you, lateral montage to the side. The videos themselves and their installation in the gallery space have in common the underlying process of editing or montage. Now, montage is a spatial form, not a literary form, although Flaubert uses it all the time. The juxtaposition of fragments that together form a new whole, but between which gaps remain. Moreover, in multiple screen installations, a montage between screens overdetermines the montage within screens, between clips. Whereas the latter montage between clips is frequently made invisible by seamless edits, and you will see tonight that that's not always the case, because we like to put forward that this is a case of montage. The former, between screens, is meant to be seen. And this turns it into a tool to develop a semiotics of lateral montage. And this produces a foregrounded sense of installationness that emphasizes the political potential of the contact or live space that installation is. It makes people aware of where they are with this work. Now, how about visitors who do not know the novel? That's a question we are frequently asked, and our answer is this. Not knowing the novel is perfectly fine. It opens an additional reading through popular culture to another serialized form of drama, the soap opera. And in a way, this Revue de Paris publication was making the novel a soap opera. In this context, our screens deal similarly with the lives of multiple characters returning to their activities, with the reassuring comfort and banality of routine, punctuated by moments of drama and tragedy that make characters from soap opera familiar and familial figures in people's home lives. And I'll just show you a part of a brief clip where you see Emma. This is the equivalent of her education in the convent and reading and being religious and all that. She is constantly alone with television. Oh, I have to do this. No sound. We have a problem with the sound. Okay. Okay. Next topic. Quoting the performative image. And this is, so you can see that all these chapters in my talk present an interpretation of a feature of the novel that we consider key to the possibility of bringing it into the present. Quoting the performative image, the look as motor of narrative. I want to draw attention now to what the principled present tense of the image entails. The tension between description and narrative is one of the most conspicuous characteristics of Flaubert's novel. It plays itself out in the presentness. Here you see two screens juxtaposed, and I think we can play them, or not? No. Two screens juxtaposed that are in the exhibition, not in this one here in the Waal Gallery, because this is a partial exhibition, but in the complete exhibition they're opposed to each other. And on the left screen, you stand in between. On the left screen you see Charles taking his morning coffee, preparing for his daily tour to visit the sick. His body language suggests boredom. And on the opposite screen, you see Emma tending to the farm animals. At first, she seems to do this with genuine affection for the animals. After a little while, her facial expression changes ever so subtly. Her actions become more futile, like picking up a leaf of grass, doing basically nothing. And thus she begins to show signs of disconnecting from her chores, perhaps being bored, and asking herself questions about her life. These images describe states that, while announcing the need for things to happen, also foreground visuality. I think I lost the clip that I wanted to show, but never mind. You see them slowly starting to look at each other, the one with a sort of voyeuristic look, and the other with a flirtatious look. He stands at a slight distance from the window so that you cannot see him. And when Emma looks up, he sort of goes away. He's shy. And Emma is flirting. And he sees more of her than he can physically see. So you see images of Emma in detail that should not be visible because he's fantasizing. That sort of thing. Now, what you have then is two looks that are socially ambiguous, that we tend to judge. So voyeurism is bad, it's exploitative, and flirting is also sometimes a little tricky. But since the screens are face to face, the visitor cannot see both at the same time. And so the visitor will be inclined to move from the one to the other and be aware of their own body and their own position. And that is a way of starting the process of thinking about what they see. This activity of the visitors, which they can notice in their own body but also in that of others, makes them aware of the dynamic and bodily nature of looking. The activity thus stimulated comprises an awareness of the nature of the two looks as different and perhaps complementary, and possibly a partial identification with either one, or with the difficulty of choosing what would you do. Right? The quotable essence of whole chapters of the novel was for us simply the slow awakening of the performative look. Everything emerges from that look. This explains, in visual immersive terms, the social functioning of looking itself, including its narrativity. Emma begins to exist when Charles sees her. This is taking her out of her everyday life. That the performative efficacy of an image depends on the look one casts on it, on the other, means that the very ontology of the visual is fundamentally dialogic. This can be deduced from Flaubert's strange alternation of description and narration, from his repulsion of explicit dialogue. For him, the look is dialogic enough. In the encounter of looks, things happen. it is this narrative structure, not the events told in it, that we quote. Now, the dialogic dynamic can be seen in the second scene, Emma's education. And when I say the second scene, it's again the second scene of the larger project. In this one, called Being Educated, young Emma, outside of the orthodox limitations of the classroom, seems to come into her own during an extracurricular art lesson. Far from allowing herself to be spoon-fed information, Emma questions what she sees, and indeed ponders if what she sees is art at all. We had the pleasure to work in the Marianne Goodman Gallery in Paris, which featured Sol LeWitt's Pyramide exhibition, which was first conceived in 1985 to 1994. And I'll show you a little fragment of Emma questioning, if we hear it.
Il y a un motif sous-jacent. Simplement, on ne peut le voir que sous l'incidence d'une certaine lumière.
Aina kun sen takana ryömisi tai matelisi nainen.
Non, je ne vois rien.
Okay. Now this also provided an opportunity for an embedded quotation, which led back to the novel by way of an anachronistic triangle. Taking one of the key colors, yellow, from Sol LeWitt's wall drawing as a visual cue, we explored its potentiality using an excerpt from Charlotte Perkins Gilman's 1892 text, The Yellow Wallpaper, so posterior to Flaubert's novel. Our art teacher, Françoise Davoine, suggests that within the painting there is an underlying motif that you can only see when the light falls in a certain way. Well, we all know that sort of art arguments. Emma takes the art of interpretation further by suggesting that she sees a woman stooping and creeping behind the pattern. Here we show a moment where the student's insight either surpasses her tutor, and also with reference to the original text, foretells her future, because Emma, like Gilman's protagonist and narrator, is destined to become a wife and mother, and like Gilman's woman in the attic, has to suppress her creativity in order to maintain the social expectations of domesticity. So this whole package of prediction is part of this. That's that looking over the mountain pass that Zygmunt Bauman talked about. Or in an opposite interpretation, she goes over the edge of rationality and verges on the border of madness. Because what kind of woman do you mean? Gilman's character's preoccupation with the wallpaper blurs the line between figure and ground, as we have seen with landscape and figure in Duren's quotation, and ultimately between reality and sanity. And insanity, possibly. Our placement of Emma before the artwork toys with the figure-ground relationship that also plays out in Gilman's text. Without knowing it, Emma as figure gleans insight from the ground of LeWitt's drawing to see a potential future for herself, like an augury of an abject woman stooping and creeping. It's not so cheerful. A far cry from the upright exuberance and inquisitiveness of her youth that she is acting out here. You see, moreover, they talk about how Sol LeWitt is known for his rejection of individual authorship and had collaborators do the actual painting. For us, this alludes to the way our work is totally collaborative and depending on the creative output of our participants. So that was another element, another layer. Now, there is this problem of narrative condensation. And I'm going to show you a little bit of the voice that kills. The most confusing and, in a sense, postmodern aspect of Flaubert's novel is the impossibility to attribute to one character, let's say Emma, the main character, all thoughts, statements, and narrative. Emma may be thematically central, but she is not a single psychological individual. She participates in and stands for a contemporary culture confused by its traditions. This makes the narratological questions, who speaks and who sees, that is the basis of my own narrative theory, exceptionally muddled and willfully confused. We call it poetics of indistinction, and then you see it everywhere. Here is an image from the epilogue to the film that you will see tonight. The deployment of the audio image is a second example of the paradox of anachronistic loyalty as quotation. The sounds, murmuring bells, tolling, sheep bleating, and cows mooing, Emma pleading, love talking, and screaming. In the novel, there is an entire network of sounds characterized by indistinction, and we had a sound artist who was capturing that fabulously. They are all reiterative, durable routine. Sara Pinheiro, the sound artist, made an installation, Emma's Soundscape, at the entrance of the full exhibition. Before you enter, you hear all these sounds already, and they run through the whole thing. The epilogue from an unpublished manuscript of Flaubert we discovered when we had already finished the filming. And this epilogue turns this indistinction into a strikingly postmodern statement. And so we had to use it. The final sentence of the novel is in the present tense. Il vient de recevoir la croix d'honneur. He just got the cross of honor. This is about Homais, the pharmacist, triumphant at the end when everybody's dead. However, the unpublished fragment says that the ending was supposed to be this. In my translation, self-doubt looks at the jars, doubts his existence. Delirium, fantastic effects, the cross repeated in the mirrors, a rainstorm of red ribbons. And then in quotation marks, am I just a character in a novel, the fruit of a delirious imagination, the invention of a little scribbler whom I've seen be born and who has invented me to make me believe I don't exist? Now, is that postmodernism for you or not? You can imagine how jubilant we were when we found this quotation, and it strongly confirms our sense of the novel's contemporaneity even now. At the time, it was a prophetic vision, and if he didn't publish it, it was probably because it wouldn't go across. This indistinction also plays out visually through the twinning of Emma to abject doubles of herself. In Flaubert, you remember that blind beggar who sings at crucial moments in a sort of abject street song. This is most clearly represented by the figure of that beggar that we turned into a woman, and who turns up as an uninvited guest at Emma's wedding and reception, and later, while Emma is on her deathbed, expressing the grief in the room like a mourner at a funeral. She is also, sorry, I think I have to leave it here. This twinning also extends to Emma's indissoluble tie to Homais the pharmacist, who act out and mirrors some of her manias. You will see tonight that they are also mirroring a little bit. Like Emma and her abject self, the beggar, Homais too breaks down and ends up in the water, a potentially volatile space that physically immerses the body that cannot be contained. In this case, Emma and Homais at their most abject. Water also inherently is an indistinguishable space, without border or line, continuously ebbing, flowing, and engulfing. This audiovisual motif quotes the novel's audio indistinction. Moreover, it can be seen to stand for the indistinction between past and present that underlies our commitment to anachronism. Now, we had to deal with Flaubert's aversion of dialogue, and film relies a lot on dialogue, doesn't it? Sometimes we have given our actors not a quotation to pronounce, but to run with. A phrase, an expression, a thought, asking them to use it as a starting point for improvisation. That method can yield images that constitute a sense-based expression of narrative content that is not illustrative, but that is still quotational across time and media. Our example is the transmutation or imaging of the famous sentence, "His conversation was flat like a sidewalk." This is shortly after she's married. She sees that he may be good enough to look at, but what does that give you when you're at the dinner table? The short sentence excels by the economy of words. The usage of the generic noun conversation accompanied by a verb in the imperfect, which expresses the reiteration of routine, implies precisely many words, an infinite number of words that end up like a load of stones bludgeoning the woman to death. This sentence needed quoting, not only as a narrative expression of a non-event and a masterpiece of condensation, but also as a representation of the boredom that will kill Emma. It causes, in other words, a reversal in the narrative economy and its dynamic between narration and description. For us, between the literary and the cinematic. The iterative character of the flat conversation implies that the sentence, the perception Emma has of its content, and the slide towards the adventures that follow, all that cannot be easily audiovisualized because we have the one sentence and then two more. To experiment, to make film a laboratory where we explore what storytelling is and can do, we only talked with the actors and then took the camera without any rehearsal. We thought it was better to just let him do it. Now, the actress playing Emma, Finnish Marja Skafari, who was at the opening last Friday, shows in her face the visual echo of Charles's discourse. Between the two characters, a sonic image functioned like the visual performative image I described above when the two screens are opposed to each other. We edited this sequence almost exclusively with Emma's face and not with the guy talking. And because that is where the boredom inscribes itself with more and more exasperation. That is where also free and direct discourse can take shape, even if Charles is the one who talks exclusively. Instead of his face, we see his shoulder blurred in what is called, in cinema speak, a dirty close-up, and dark, as if looming over Emma, like a shadow. Like the emerging contact out of the two socially dubious looks in the first piece, the two characters produce the boredom, ending in horror, together. I'll just show you, if I can manage it, a small excerpt.
La construction de screen, si on arrive à les cueillir assez tôt, vu que les oiseaux viennent tout manger toute la nuit. J'ai l'impression que quand même, tous ces fruits rouges, ça perd de sa saveur. Cette année, au menu des visuels, les cerises n'ont rien récupéré. Non. Ça va? Ça va? Oui.
I think it stopped somehow. She was supposed to scream, but you'll get that scream tonight. Now, it is the spectator who, seeing and feeling the horror from Emma's face, reads the face in a certain sense, allowing the boredom to become visible. So you need the spectator to make that boredom happen. When at the end Emma screams, Charles asks, astonished, "Ça va?" As if he thought that, if only he could transform boredom into an illness, he would be able to save his marriage and his wife. He's a doctor, after all. And not so much later, a Viennese doctor invented a way of considering such boredom and illness indeed. Flaubert predicted Freud. which is why Thomas Jamin, our actor, and his superb acting that includes a slight rise to hysteria seemed so perfectly well fitted. The visual image here, that of Emma's more and more exasperated face, is the product of the voice, the words, of the conversation with only one speaker, that Flaubert, also assigning it to the single speaker, sa conversation, had characterized so perfectly. Charles is again the generator, the character who brings about an invisible event, as he did with his voyeurism, the one that transforms Emma, barely awoken to life, into a living cadaver, entering an agony that takes up the remainder of the story. From this moment on, it goes downhill. Her husband does not cause this agony, he only facilitates it as its instrument. The true cause is the expectation, the passivity of she who is captured by a system that she fails to understand, but that has been instilled into her from an early age on. This system where commodities are invested with emotion and love is for sale is what kills her, and never ceases to kill or otherwise damage people. That is what we consider the contemporaneity today. This makes the men pawns of the system, and in spite of superficial differences, it makes them very much alike. Now, how to render a resemblance among three men, if they each have a priori the mission to save Emma from the boredom by their contrast with the men of routine? The saving expeditions fail precisely because the men are too alike. But Flaubert doesn't say this. We have quoted this Flaubertian unnarratable, to quote a term by Gérard Genette, as follows. First, the three men are played by the same actor. Then, Emma and her man don't speak the same language. The former decision was motivated by the obvious but unexpressed fact that the young woman is not in love with anyone in particular, but with love, its lures, its illusions, its push to make passive and dependent. The latter decision does justice to the undeniable and unnarratable fact that Emma and her man don't understand each other, ever. Israeli sociologist Eva Illouz came up with the term emotional capitalism. Some would prefer to call it emotional consumerism. Some people have said that. But that would lay the blame with the one afflicted with a buying syndrome. We could rather think this syndrome has been created, pushed into existence by the capitalist economic system. The damage it is doing around the world right at this moment mirrors what Flaubert perceived around himself and saw around him in the 1850s. And that is astonishing. When we see Emma on her different shopping sprees, a certain madness is undeniable. But since this is a social issue, the lures of capitalism investing commodities with sentiment, with emotion, we make this a collective madness. The shopkeepers, real estate agents, mother-in-law who becomes paranoid when she starts to follow Emma when she goes shopping, everyone contributes to the madness of this reversal of values. In accordance with our interest in making this issue quite central, our mode of visual storytelling in this respect is confrontational on the level of characters as well as between the installation and its visitors. Our quest to incorporate the contemporary as a strategy for anachronism led us to use clips from YouTube to give voice to some of the economic and social concerns going around in the world. During Emma's depression, after the end of her affair with Rodolphe, she mindlessly turns to daytime television to numb her pain. American chat shows and online agony aunts, and even images from old British sex education films, provided a key source for our content, in particular Dr. Phil on television every single day, who expounds on the possibility to identify a cheating gene. And I do have a little clip, but if it's not, if you don't hear the sound, I'll stop it.
$37,000 a year, yet she was $61,000 in debt.
I'm going to be alone and paying bills on my own. I'm terrified.
so you don't hear it well. Okay, Flaubert's novel presents us with a thematic exploration of the cultural conspiracy that turns business into an emotional issue and love into a business venture. In the words of Eva Illouz, capitalism around the turn of the 20th century had become an emotionally managed enterprise. She develops this idea at greater length and in greater depth in her 2012 book, Why Love Hurts. Flaubert had seen it coming. He has also seen its deadly qualities. Emma's feverish overspending and excessive desires for excitement exhausted her long before she kills herself. The responsibility is collective and systemic rather than individual. And that is the rationale behind Flaubert's quotational discourse. In the novel, considerations of money run through the text with regularity. There is a range of confrontations between Emma and her mother-in-law, focusing on Emma's spending. But prior to that, Madame Bovary Senior had already more or less sold her son to his first wife, expecting financial gain from the match. And when riding towards Father Rouault's farm for his first visit, when he first meets Emma, we hear, in Charles' interior monologue, we hear about the farmer's wealth. At this very early stage then, before having seen her, the intertwinement of money and love is already staged, and the venality of all concerned suggested. So they are all in this game. This offered us an opportunity to visualize lure itself. Immersion both embodies lure and offers the tools to take critical distance from it. And this is how it is a parallel with the topic of this conference, of this winter school. Hence, no appeal to identification, instead the freedom to empathize, criticize, and enjoy all at once. The empathic unsettlement that La Capra mentioned is very close. Now, as we mentioned, quotation also comes in the form of homage, of visual nods to other artists. And one could consider this a process of retrospective affiliation in which the temporality of our search is reversed to find associations with work by other later artists. Here again, some images from our work in relation to the experimental filmmaker Maya Deren's film this time, Ritual in Transfigured Time from 46, and again At Land from 44. Deren's films often depict space by showing the threshold between societal borders, intercutting wild or natural spaces with the realm of high society of the bourgeoisie. In Ritual, a woman enters a room in which a party is in full swing. Deren traps her in the throng by using freeze frames to fix her position amongst the crowd. What plays out is an increasingly violent choreography in which the crowd's initial engagement with the woman is abandoned to the society buzz in which they no longer see her, but only brush past her. In our work, Emma and Charles stand at the threshold of a reception in Paris. Their anticipation and eagerness is somewhat crushed by the antisocial, cool treatment that greets them. Our guests freeze as the outsiders enter their world, an inherently cruel act of social severance. Another example from Deren's film, At Land, is when she climbs up a tower of driftwood to arrive at a dinner table lined with guests. Deren subsequently crawls along the table, intercutting her journey along with its images of crawling amongst dense foliage. Now, Deren's inappropriate behavior is mirrored in Emma's own strange behavior at the table when, after dancing with a very handsome man, it's over, 2 minutes of happiness, and she puts her head on the table. Later, we have Emma appear as a ghost in the same scene, unseen by the others, including her husband, another nod to Deren. At the same time, it is a metaphorically hinted quotation of Flaubert's allusion to Emma's suicide by arsenic, metaphorically staged by white sugar that she overeats at this party. These visual quotations can be seen as a politics and poetics of allusion. To see these allusions to the ending, we must be willing to give up narrative streamlining and consider the image as double by definition. So this also parallels the impossibility of chronology between past, present, and future. An allusion is not simply a metaphor. Instead of replacing one thing with another, an allusion enfolds the alluded into what we see. Allusions operate not on an either-or structure, but on a both-and or as well as inclusive model. Sugar denotes Emma's upcoming tendency to bulimia, part of her tendency to acquire luxury goods, eat too much, and otherwise excessive spending when her frustration mounts. Bulimia itself can already be a poison. It is unhealthy. But in combination with the spending craze, it ruins her financially. If then sugar is a kind of poison, it also alludes formally to the white powder of the arsenic. Meanwhile, in her glamorous, bold dress, Emma is profoundly isolated, ostracized, and, of course, unhappy. It's not her individual romantic madness, but society's collective responsibility. I'm going to wind up here. I have given examples of quotation in the broadest possible sense. Quotation in this case is itself a gesture of quotation, because Flaubert's novel itself is practically entirely quotational, citational, consisting of quotations without quotation marks, as Roland Barthes had it. We can also say consisting of clichés drawn from the bottomless well of cultural ways of seeing and saying, of interdiscursive fragments. This forced us to make a citational script, quoting from Flaubert, who is quoting social birth. At the same time, the majority of the text, which is narrative, required substitutes of a different nature. So we eliminated the narrative pretext for the event, such as the broken leg of Emma's father, and instead imaged simply the delayed and belated mutual act of looking. Quotation stands at the intersection of iconography and intertextuality. It refers to the ready-made quality of, in his case, linguistic science. But science, as we know with the semiotic background that you have here, are not only linguistic, which a writer or image making finds available. First, according to classical narrative theory, direct discourse, or the literal quotation of the words of characters, is a form that reinforces mimesis. Second, as fragments of real speech, they authenticate the fiction. The fiction is no longer just a fiction. They serve a reality effect, as Roland Barthes called it, which is in fact the opposite. It's a fiction of realism. Thus, they function like shifters, allowing the presence of multiple realities within a single image. Third, in Barthesian dialogism, quotation stands for the utter fragmentation of language itself. They point in directions from where the words have come. This conception of quotation turns the precise quotation of utterances into the borrowings of discursive habits. And this interdiscursivity accounts for pluralized meanings, typically ambiguities. Finally, the fourth meaning of quotation, stipulating the impossibility of reaching the alleged underlying earlier speech, because there is no literal earlier speech. Deconstructionism emphasizes what the quoted subject does to its object. Whereas for Bakhtin, the word never forgets where it has been, in his famous quote, before it was quoted. For Derrida, it never returns there without the burden of the excursion through the quotation. This, I submit, is how the past can become the present, as a glimpse to the future. Long live anachronism, so that we may have a future. Thank you.